Got it. And let's record. All right. Hello. Welcome. We have a live audience today. Thank God. And we are going to learn right now the laws of Sukkot. There are a lot of laws. There's a total of 5 mitzvot of Sukkot. Each one requires probably an hour class by itself if you really want to learn it in depth. But we're just going to sort of like gloss over some of the main concepts. If you have individual questions, that might it might help things. But we'll try to go in order. The famous story goes that there's a halacha, you might know, that as soon as Yom Kippur ends, you're supposed to jump right into the next mitzvah and start building your sukkah. Okay, so the famous story goes with the Vilna Gaon when Yom Kippur left, instead of breaking his fast, instead of going home and building his sukkah, what did he do? He opened up Masechta Sukkah. He opened up the Talmud and started learning the laws of Sukkah, right, from the Talmud. So he knew he knew what the law was, what the final halacha was. We don't learn law directly from the Talmud, right? But we learn the concepts, the back and forth, as we learned in Yaakov yesterday. But the Vilna Gaon knew what the halacha was, and so to review it, he learned the entire Talmud, the whole Masechta Sukkah in one night, right after Yom Kippur, and then he broke his fast. So that's how the story goes. Either way, it's very important to learn the laws of Sukkah. It's important to know what we have to do. So, there are 5 mitzvot for Sukkot. 3 are given in the Torah, and another 2 mitzvot are given by the rabbis. The first mitzvah that we're going to discuss, this is basically going to be the structure of the class today. The first mitzvah we're going to discuss is living in the sukkah, whatever that means. That will include building the sukkah. At least basically, there's a lot of laws about building a sukkah. That's the first 2 chapters of tractate Sukkah is about what about this? What about that? Living in the sukkah is a Torah mitzvah. Yeah. It's in Vayikra 23:42. If you want to test me on that one. Another Torah mitzvah. Another Torah mitzvah is the taking of the 4 species. All 4 species are one mitzvah. The etrog, the lulav, the hadassim, and the aravot. That's all from the Torah. A little bit different how the Torah describes it. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But we'll discuss what's a kosher etrog, what's not, all that stuff. I have a very beautiful book I've used for years and years on that topic. It's called The Halachos of the 4 Species, published by Feldheim. A lot of nice pictures in there, really gross and on the other extreme, very beautiful etrogim and everything. So that's that. And then there's a third obligation from the Torah to rejoice, Simchat Yom Tov. We have to talk about that. There's a way to do that. It's not just like just put a smile on your face. The Torah requires certain things be done on Yom Tov. In fact, as we'll see when we learn this, that also applies for Chol HaMoed. The rules for Simchat Yom Tov apply for Chol HaMoed. You're supposed to have the same halachot apply. A lot of people don't know that. People think Chol HaMoed is just a regular day. It's okay. I'll shake the lulav and etrog. I'll eat my meal. If I eat a meal, I'll eat it in the sukkah. But otherwise, I'll go to Magic Mountain or Knott's Berry Farm, whatever. I'll go to the zoo. And there's no real there's essential mitzvot of Chol HaMoed that people don't even know about. People go to work, and you're allowed to do work. Sometimes we'll see. All right. There are 2 other mitzvot we should mention that are not mentioned directly in the Torah. It's mentioned in the Gemara and elsewhere. One is a mitzvah called Nisuch HaMayim, which we don't have anymore because unfortunately we do not have a Beit HaMikdash. But Nisuch HaMayim was a water libation ceremony. There isn't really much to say about that because we don't do it anymore. There's no real practical halachot about that. But in memory of that, we have, or most places have, a Simchat Beit HaShoeva, some sort of party in a sukkah, usually at night during Chol HaMoed, to sort of have music and dancing, whatever else, food sometimes, hopefully. So we in past years we've had a ice cream social. It's been sort of our shul's Simchat Beit HaShoeva. This year we're having a kumzitz Thursday night at 7:15. I'm looking at you. Yeah, you're preparing the music. All right, so that's what we do for Nusach HaMayim. And there's a fifth mitzvah, which are called the Hoshanot or Hoshanas, where we take the lulav and esrog and we walk around the bima. And on Hoshana Rabbah, which is the last day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, we go a little further. There's more of a ceremony. There's more davening, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about that. But that's going to be at the tail end of our class. We'll also hopefully be able to speak a little bit about Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, which are not exactly Sukkot. Actually, they're after Sukkot. A lot of people don't know that. It's not part of the holiday, which is why there's argument about whether or not you need to be in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeret, but Simchat Torah you're not allowed to be in the sukkah, even if that's the only place you have. So if you're God forbid your house is flooded, if somehow your sukkah isn't, so and there's nowhere else to eat, you have to go find another house to eat in. You can't eat in the sukkah. It'll give people the impression that that's a mitzvah, and it's not a mitzvah anymore. It's kind of like blowing the shofar erev Rosh Hashanah. We want to distinguish between the actual mitzvah and not the mitzvah, and that's not the mitzvah. Anybody remember that ridiculous show? What was it called? Dinosaurs or something? Back in the late 90s, there was a show, a talking dinosaur family, and the little baby didn't like its father, right? And whenever the mother picked it up, he said, "Mom, mama," and whenever the father picked him up, the baby would hit the father and say, "Not the mama, not the mama." Right? So this the holiday. Not the holiday. So we have to make a distinction between one and the other. So that's we don't have to hit the sukkah, God forbid, but that's kind of the idea. All right, so let's get right into how to build a sukkah. Okay, the sukkah ideally has 4 walls. They're the famous, and I think I've said this last year and many years in the past, also from the Vilna Gaon. He said you can learn the ideal shape of the sukkah from the shape of the letters that spell the root word of the word sukkah, which is a samach, a chaf, and a hey. So a samach is surrounded on all 4 sides. Ideally, should be surrounded on all 4 sides, obviously with a doorway, tzurat petach. It needs to have some sort of way to be able to come in. You don't have to jump over. You shouldn't. Right? That would not be good. It needs to be fully surrounded with a doorway, obviously. So that's that's the ideal sukkah. Yeah, you need to be able to get in. Yeah, you shouldn't be able to jump into it, because that's one of the reasons for, as we'll see, there's a minimum height for the walls of the sukkah. And
like if you built yourself in from the
sorry.
Inside.
Yeah.
Or let's say you built it from the inside and you live.
Okay. Yeah. So for practical reasons, yes, you should have a doorway. Okay. You could have you could have a ladder. You could have a tunnel. Yes, it could be all surrounded on all 4 sides, but it's hermetically sealed. So you could do that, but it's not ideal for practical reasons. So let's not do that. Let's there are all kinds of weird theoretical sukkot that the Gemara mentions, like what if you make it out of hay? What if you this? What if that? It's not usually worthy of discussion in a practical halacha class, except for if you want to talk about the halachot of what if you're going away somewhere and you want to eat in a sukkah. So, for example, a car. Exactly. You want to make a sukkah. You want to make your car into a sukkah, so you can eat. Take a break from your office, or you're going to the zoo and you want to go back to your car to eat your lunch. And let's say you're eating bread, or you're stringent and you want to eat everything in the sukkah, which the Gemara mentions, the Mishnah mentions as a stringency. but it says tov alav bracha, which is you get a special blessing for this particular kind of stringency. There are certain stringencies where you're considered a tipesh, you're considered a fool, and there's certain stringencies that in sukkah is, by the way, an example of these. And there's certain stringencies where you're considered, you do the stringency, you get a blessing for it. So sukkah is a great example of that because, for example, if it rains on Sukkot, the first night, or there's a mitzvah d'oraita to eat in the sukkah on the first night. There's a mitzvah from the rabbis to eat in the sukkah from that point on. And if it rains and it's too disgusting, too difficult to eat in the sukkah, so what do you do? So the halacha is, if you can, you make kiddush, eat the rest of the meal inside. There's all kinds of situations. Not going to be able to cover all of them. That doesn't usually happen in San Diego, Baruch Hashem. But from what I understand, somebody just told me they're going to Atlanta this right. So I think they're expecting rain all for the next 3 days straight in Atlanta. So that they have rained a lot in New York. Sukkot time. It's not the best time to be out. I've heard in Canada it's already it can be close to zero. This time of the year, but the halacha is if you can, you eat outside. But if it gets too disgusting and everything, somebody who eats outside and gets the food all soggy and everything is considered a chassid. It's righteous, but it's considered a fool, a righteous fool. So it's not there's no real blessing in that, right? So it's basically we're considering it as if Hashem is not happy with our avoda for whatever reason. Maybe Hashem is not happy with people living in New York. I'm not going to get into it. God forbid. So Hashem is not happy with us with our avoda. It's like a servant bringing wine to their master, and the master takes the wine or whatever or water and throws it in the servant's face. So that's what that's considered. Okay, back to how to build a sukkah. So the ideal is really 4 walls with a doorway, preferably. So I'd be able to get in. I don't want to tunnel in. I don't want to jump over a fence or use a ladder or glide in, right? Zip line into the sukkah. Right? So I don't want to do anything crazy. I just want to be able to walk in. So doorway, please, for me. All right. So that's 4 walls. That's the samach. The chaf is 3 walls, and obviously there's no wall on one side. That's acceptable as well. And then the last worst possible kosher sukkah, I mean worst possible kosher sukkah, has 2 walls and a little bit. So like a hay, right? Has 2 walls and a little bit of a 3rd wall. That's a pole that's thick enough. Not going to get into the dimensions right now, but it's a noticeable pole that can also be acceptable. That's what you would do for a perhaps if you were going to use your car and you don't have a convertible. If you were going to use your car as a sukkah, or you don't have a truck, if you are going to use your car for a sukkah, you could do that. The door, you open up the door, and that would be 1 wall. You bring like some bamboo sheet or something. That'll be your 2nd wall, right? You put and then the little bit of the car that's attached to the a little bit of the rest of the car or whatever is going to count as your little bit of a 3rd wall, and that counts. And then you just put some schach on top. That's one way. That's an easy way to do it. If you have a skylight, so it's it could if it's a big enough skylight, it needs to be the majority of the roof. Well, not the majority of the roof, but it needs to have a certain distance from the edges and everything else for it to be counted as an open space, open enough that you can put stock on top. Or if you can remove your roof like the convertible, that could be possible. Also, of course, the walls need to be high enough, but we'll get to that in a moment. What is? Yeah, usually, yeah, that could count. Yes. The walls of the sukkah can be made out of anything. Big misnomer. A lot of people think it has to be made out of wood. It has to be, whatever. No, not true. the walls of a sukkah can be made out of anything. Can technically be made out of living animals. In fact, if you can find 4 oxen who aren't moving, and you put schach on top of those 4 oxen, and you're standing in between them, you can eat your meal. So the Gemara talks about this, but that's not practical. Okay, you don't know that they're not going to move, and also you want your walls to be of a certain height, and they have to start from a certain point on the ground. The Gemara says that you don't want your walls to be high enough that a baby kid, not a human kid, baby goat, it would be able to fit under it and into your sukkah, because that's not a wall. That's not a wall. If anything can get through, then you're not at all surrounded, right? It's basically not a wall, not a wall. Well, not a wall. So it also if it's made out of any material that's not hard, if it's like made out of canvas or something like that, it has to be able to not move too much. If it's moving a lot, like a sail, then it's again not a wall. It doesn't provide you the sturdiness that you would expect from a wall. So how much? So the rabbis say a tefach. A tefach is, let's say, approximately 4 inches. So if it shouldn't, the wall should not be able to move 4 inches in a strong wind.
Oh, moving.
Yeah, move. So like.
That's what I'm thinking. Like my in-laws have like these shades coming down like by the walls, so like they do kind of move.
Okay, so
we have the lattice.
Okay, so if you have the lattice on the bottom, so again okay, so
like that's the house, and then the
good wall, what house wall?
And then they have the lattice on both sides, and then we have the
So you already have 3.
You have 3, so you have 3 kosher walls.
There's a little gap
Between what?
between the lattice and the house.
How much of a gap? I you're drawing the gap. But it depends on how big of a gap it is. If it's
This is the house.
yeah.
This is the lattice, and then there's like a gap, but it has like an attachment to the house.
Okay.
Like,
But how much is the gap? How big is it? Could you fit your fist through it?
arms, my arms length.
Yeah, you'd want to close that gap.
No.
All right. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that argument. But yes, you want to make sure that there's not too much of a gap that it would be considered attached.
Sometimes people use a string
Yeah.
that sort of just to.
Yeah. So a string works.
How is that how is that a wall?
Right. So yeah. So exactly. Good question. So so a wall. I don't think we're going to get to all the other halachot today. But it's a good question. But I knew I was going to get myself into this. This was like a predicted problem. The technicalities of what's considered a wall and everything else. So a string is considered a wall. Let's keep it simple. A string is considered a wall if it's a certain distance from each other. If there's a certain distance between each string and its tout between, it could be considered a wall.
You need the top of the bottom.
Right.
So they can't get in.
Right. Exactly. Can't get in. Exactly.
Okay.
And the top is the right height. And then there's enough distance in between as well that it can be considered one thing. Let's say within 3, so within a foot of each other. If you have the strings within a foot of each other, yeah, you can consider it a wall.
Okay.
Somebody once in the shul tried to make the most lenient opinion sukkah, which by the way, I don't recommend. That's not the point. The point of halacha isn't to try to be the most lenient. There's no problem being the most strict about certain things, but there's a problem being the most lenient in emergency situations. You need to use your car as a sukkah, whatever. Okay, so there's reason to be lenient. But anyway, somebody once wanted to make the most lenient possible sukkah. They made all of their walls out of string, nothing else. out of their wall, out of string, and then there's a big gap between the top string and the schach, which could be acceptable, but again,
one's being used like that.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
At restaurants in Eretz Yisrael.
Okay, so maybe there's a reason. So there they might have a reason because they don't want to have questions. They don't want to take the time to build a sukkah. They don't have the material. Okay, but it's not ideal. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about the schach. We mentioned So the string, the walls can be made out of any material. The schach cannot. The schach has to be natural material. Has to have been and has to be preferably resting on natural material. So if your walls are made out of, say, metal, which is perfectly kosher, you can't have the schach resting mostly on the metal. So what many people do is they put maybe like what's that called? They tie a bamboo to the top of the metal frame, and then they have the schach resting on that. That's fine. Bamboo is a natural material, for those of you who don't know, and so that works. The schach, nothing can be above the schach. Nothing can cover the schach. If it's a little bit of the house is covering some of the schach, that's okay, but don't eat under that part of the schach, right? You need to be where you're sitting and eating, or where you're sleeping, if you're doing the mitzvah that way, has to have nothing above it. And even a branch of a tree cannot cover the schach. Right? Even if it's not, I can see there's still plenty of shade from the schach. I can still, plenty of, I can see the sun easily. It's only one tiny little branch over my schach. Shouldn't be a problem. Yes, it is a problem. You can't eat under that branch. And I actually, you should try to remove all these things before the sukkah is even built. When the sukkah is built, it needs to be kosher. And so you need to chop out, if you're going to chop any branches or anything, you shouldn't wait till the sukkah is built and then chop off the branches. You should chop off those branches first and then build the sukkah. All right. Anything else about the basic structure of the sukkah? Okay. The mitzvah is to eat and sleep in the sukkah. It's become out of fashion to sleep in the sukkah. There's certain groups of people, certain Hasidic groups, for instance, who do not even sleep in the sukkah because it's too holy of a place. Not going to get into that. According to non-Hasidic halacha, it's a mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah if you can. Obviously, circumstances, a husband and wife would be a possible issue of privacy, etc. But if you can, and if the weather permits, and you're not scared of the possible critters, then you should by all means sleep in the sukkah. It has Hashem's protection, etc. That's that. Eating in the sukkah is also a mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah. First of all, the halacha of sleeping in the sukkah and eating in the sukkah is an obligation specifically, I should say not exclusively, but specifically for men, right? Women are exempt. And so there are many communities where the sukkah is a small sukkah, can only fit like one or two people. That's because the wife and the daughters can technically eat outside the sukkah and eat inside the house in comfort, and the man has to sit in the sukkah. So that happens at times. In certain communities, that's the accepted thing to do. In our community, obviously, we that's not accepted, but it's more acceptable. It's more common for families to eat together. And so in that situation, we definitely don't want to separate families that are used to eating together. And so therefore, no problem eating in the sukkah together. Okay, guests, obviously, also. What else about eating in the sukkah? Yes. What has to be eaten in the sukkah? So only baked grains need to be eaten in the sukkah for a man. For women, it can eat anywhere, anything, not a problem. But it's in other words, if you're going to have a sandwich, or something that looks like a sandwich that includes a cookie or a cake or anything like that, you should eat it in a sukkah with a bracha, a special bracha to say when you eat inside the sukkah of Leishev B'Sukkah. Correct.
But when do you make it exactly?
When do you make it? Right before?
Like after the bite or before the bite? I'm saying, do you make a mizonos leishev and then eat it?
Yeah, exactly. So you make the bracha on the food, whatever the bracha is, hamotzi or mizonot, and you make the Leishev B'Sukkah, and then you eat. By the way, there are many opinions that when a woman, even though she's exempt from the mitzvah, if she wants to eat in the sukkah, she may, obviously, and she would do it with a bracha, also l'shei b'sukkah. Assuming, of course, the sukkah is kosher, which is what the whole beginning of the class was about. Okay, so the first half of the class. So how we're going to get to the other stuff, I don't know, but we're going to try. Any other questions about sukkah? Basically, yes.
I know that.
Okay, deal. All right, the 4 species, also mitzvah for Sukkot. The first in the Oraita mitzvah, as I said, there's going to be a difference between the Oraita mitzvah and our mitzvah today. According to the Torah, you only need to take the 7 species on the first day. And now that we do not have a Beit HaMikdash, unfortunately, we take it all the other days as well. Sorry. 4 species. Did I say 7? Don't take 7 species. Do not. That's a big issue. Taking 7 species. I add flowers. Sequoia branches. Don't add anything to your 4 species. Oh my gosh. My goodness. Yeah. Oh boy. Don't do that. The 4 species. We'll talk about them in a moment. Oh my goodness. This is why it's important to get some sleep. So the 4 species are taken on the first day according to the Torah, on all the other days according to the rabbis. Okay, that's because in the Beit HaMikdash, the 4 species were taken all the days of Sukkot. Since we don't have a Beit HaMikdash anymore, to remember that we did that in the Beit HaMikdash, the rabbis established that we do it also the other days as well, which is why the first day is the most important. And it's so important that you even have to own the mitzvah. You have to own the 4 species on the first day. It has to be what the Torah says, the Gemara says, the word in the pasuk is the word lachem. You take the species of your own. It has to be yours. You have to own it. Now, if you didn't order a set, or back in the old country in Europe when it was almost impossible to get a kosher set of the 4 species because it was out of season and it was freezing cold in Poland or whatever. So like, how are you supposed to get in September a citron fruit and a dasim and a ravet and all that stuff? So what they did was they created a system wherein you could borrow on condition that you will return it. So when you're borrowing it, it's yours, but you made a condition: I will return it back to you, so that the original owner gets it back. They used to have, you might have heard of this before, they used to have 1 set for the entire shul, the entire synagogue, the entire community. Hundreds of people perhaps would have their hands on the same 4 species. So by the end of the day, I don't know what condition it was in anymore, but that happens. This probably still happens today in certain communities. Yes. When the lender should say, it's yours now. It's you own it. This is a present. You're not buying it because you can't.
Condition to return, or don't even say that?
They should, ideally. Yeah. So okay. So let's talk about not kosher etrogim. Okay. So this one that looks like a lime, it's completely round. This is a problem. It should have a shape more conical on top, like this. The ideal one is on the cover of the book. Okay, it should be ideally yellow, right? Some people insist on it having a pitom, which is this little tiny stick on the top of it. And by the way, this is the top of it. It doesn't grow from the pitom. When it grows, the pitom grows first. There's pictures of it in the book. We don't really have time for it. If you want to look through it, you may. But when it grows, the pitom grows upwards, and then the fruit develops, and it grows from the stem, right? It needs to have a stem. And if you've noticed the different prices for these things, this has to do with how perfect it is, how much it looks like this, right? So some people want to have a pitom. Some people insist on not having a pitom. Why would they insist on not having a pitom? Because if it breaks, it's not kosher. So if it was born without a pitom, it never broke, right? You dropped it and you hit the top, nothing broke off, it's kosher. If you have a pitom, and it falls and breaks the top, it's not a kosher etrog anymore. Completely, it's a nothing. You might as well put it in your salad, right? It's not useful for the mitzvah anymore. It has to have grooves and bumps. That's how you know it's not a lemon. It's not smooth like a lemon. Yes.
If it could break and then it wouldn't be kosher, wouldn't it be wise to get two of them when you're getting
If you can afford it, yeah.
And then you have two, but you otherwise just keep it in a box so it doesn't.
Keep it in a box. You handle it gently and don't drop it. And you shouldn't drop a mitzvah. You should be very careful with mitzvah in general. You're right, but so the important thing is it does not need to be born with a pitom. It's perfectly kosher without. And some people, in fact, people who ordered from me, they said, please make sure it does not have a pitom, which is not a problem, because most of them, by the way, do not have a pitom anymore. Majority of people do not want to deal with that kind of problem. So it's a situation. Now, one of the ways to know the difference between a lemon and an etrog is to cut the etrog in half. Don't do this before the holiday, because then it's not a kosher etrog. But if it has a thick skin like this, basically the majority of the fruit is the skin, that's an etrog. If the skin is very thin and the majority of the fruit is the meat of the fruit, then it's probably a lemon. Or a grafted etrog with a lemon, and that's also not kosher. Right? That's one of the reasons for the price of an etrog, is that it's basically the people you buy it from are basically guaranteeing that it wasn't grafted with any other citrus fruit.
People graft them a lot usually.
Unfortunately, people would, for financial reasons. It's much cheaper to and perhaps even easier to raise any kind of citrus fruit that kind of looks like an etrog and then sell it. It's a very expensive lemon.
Also, practically any non-Jew who wants to eat citron wouldn't want something that has so little flesh. So they want something that
Correct.
I really
Right.
don't see people eating etrog. I find it more like in perfumes.
Perfumes, vodkas, yeah, that's true. It doesn't really taste so good, by itself, not like a lemon. Right. That's true. It's not except for in that one movie, right? Ushpizin. Did I just give away the ending? Anyway, so oops. Ignore that. Spoiler alert. Too late. So yeah, any kind of black mark on the top of the etrog, on the very cone of it, right where the pitom would be, would make the etrog not kosher. The black mark elsewhere, it could still be kosher, but it won't be ideal anymore. It won't be the one you'd want to spend a lot of money on. Some of these etrogim, we paid $35 for our sets, $50, $60 for our sets. There are people who pay $200, $300, $1,000 for a set of perfectly very like a perfect set like this, like a yellow etrog with a pitom and a beautiful shape and a nice size and everything else. There's people who pay more money for the better mitzvah, and again, tova lav bracha. There's reason to be machmir and stringent in these things. People who care want to show their care for, if they want to do this to show Hashem how much they care about mitzvot. That's a beautiful thing. If they're doing it so that they can brag, look at my beautiful etrog. In shul, they want other people to see how much they care about mitzvot. That's not so nice anymore. That's not the reason to be stringent in a mitzvah, right? Again, we have to remember the focus here is showing Hashem how much we care about Him. All right, so that's an etrog. Let's get to the next of the four species. Let's talk about the lulav. The lulav is a palm branch. We live in California. You'll see them growing on top of a palm tree all the time. And are they all kosher? Technically, yeah. I mean, you don't have to have any kind of kavana when you plant it. So like any lulav you find on top of a palm tree could be kosher. You just have to make sure that the shedra, the spine of it, is not broken. That it's I'm supposed to be showing you these. So it has to be straight. The middle branch is called the spine. It needs to be whole. It often when it gets older it splits, and if the split is too big, let's say a tefach, say 4 inches about, then it's not kosher. By the way, don't check if your spine if the spine has a crack in it, because what are you going to do to check it? You're going to be splitting it. Right? So if it's split, if at all possible, you can look at it gently and see if there's any split. If there's no split, don't try to tug at it to see.
Sorry, where is the palm tree? The lulav part? It's like
The very, very top of a palm tree.
like that yellow part over. You see that palm tree up there?
It's just that one piece coming.
That
up
one
the back.
stick that grows on top of it.
There's only one lulav per palm tree.
Yeah, one lulav per palm
Wow.
tree. That is correct.
Wait,
What?
Just the.
So there's more? I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. I did not know that. I always thought it was one, but okay, I guess there might be more. All right, so here's a picture of them when they're growing. You see that right? That see it?
Yeah, I mean, that's it.
You can pass it. So that's the lulav. There are they grow in different sizes. There's medium, large, small. You might think you want a large lulav. The problem with a large lulav is you don't know if it's going to break. It's going to be very hard to shake without breaking it. They're not very. They're a little unwieldy that way, and they potentially break more easily. And so it's ideal to have really a medium-sized one, and like Goldilocks, not too big, not too small, just right. Okay. Yes, and beds. Nothing wrong with beds. Just right. The question really, not related to Sukkot. The question is, how come the mother had the medium-sized everything, right? Not the kid, right? You think like the mother's smaller than the kid? Anyway, that's bigger. I don't know. Anyway, I mean, it's the other way around, right? The kid always had the baby had the medium-sized bed. That means the baby was bigger than the mother, right?
Wait, what?
That's true.
What bed was Goldilocks found in? The medium-sized bed. Whose bed was that? The baby's, not the mother's. Not the mama. And so again, it's too soft, too big. The porridge was the mother's porridge was too cold, right? I don't know. Poor mother.
Is that dinosaur show with the dinosaur that was really tiny and like big eyes?
Yep, sounds like it. Sounds like it. Okay. Anyway, I wouldn't recommend it. I never found it funny, but it was never amused by that show. But okay, an ideal hadas. Let's talk about the hadasim. There's 3 of them. Somebody once told me an easy way to remember this was this is totally wrong grammatically. by the way, just letting you know. But Hadassim sounds like Hasidim, right? Righteous people. And Aravos sounds like Averos, sins. What do you want to have more of? Righteous people or sins? Righteous people. So Hasidim, Hadassim, you need to have 3. Aravos sounds like Averos, you should have 2. All right, it's a ridiculous way to remember it, but just like it works. Okay, it's
We have one of them by like Lake Murray or something.
yes, yes, we have willows. Yes,
Which is what?
which is the Hadassim. Aravos, sorry.
Aravos?
Yes, they're Aravos.
Those are the lips.
That was me.
Yes.
They're slender more. They're like the lips of a.
Sleep. What?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Okay.
Not for the recording.
Not for the recording, yes. Not for public consumption. You should know these things. All right, so back to it's a busy season. Let's call it that. So it's all covered. It's not dry. It's not cut off. It's not broken on top. Right? There's all these beautiful leaves. It smells nice. By the way, there's an issue of whether you can smell it or not on Yom Tov. By the way, you shouldn't. If you're using it for the mitzvah, it's considered like muktzah. So it's sort of an issue to smell them. Obviously, on purpose. Obviously, if you smell them, you don't have to plug your nose when you're doing the mitzvah. But you shouldn't like try to get a good whiff. That's sort of a problem. Although after Yom Tov or before Yom Tov is fine. All right, so let's talk about. So that's the Hadassim. The Aravot. So a few things about the Aravot. Also, they should not be dried up like this. Neither should the Hadassim. Neither should the Lulav. They should all be not necessarily moist. They have been cut off from their source of water, but they shouldn't be dry. Like they shouldn't be brittle. Shouldn't be able to break apart at the touch. If they are, you need to replace them. It most often happens, at least by us. I don't know. It seems like not a problem elsewhere. Or at least that's what the person who I bought these from implied. But it seems that the aravot dry up faster than everything else, and the solution to that is to keep them in a moist towel. All right, a moist, not wet towel, not necessarily paper towel. Ideally, actually a towel or a rag.
Are there issues on Yom Tov for putting it into that?
So not if it's already wet. If the rag is not wet yet, there is a way to do it on Yom Tov, and that is to moisten it indirectly. So put water on your hand and then tap it onto the rag. You could do that, not a problem. You don't want it to be too wet to be able to squeeze. Anyway, you want it to be moist. Very important. Because if it's wet, it'll start growing stuff, and it'll also be so wet it'll be like soggy, and then it'll be like it'll fall apart. Also, it'll be too heavy. What else happens? Yeah. Also, to keep the hadassim fresh, you can also keep them moist. Not a problem. What's interesting is I think ideally the hadassim should be kept in the refrigerator. They should be cold. The aravot, not necessarily. So some people keep them separate. What we do, by the way, just so you know, what we do doesn't always work out perfectly. Is we keep them moist and in the refrigerator, and usually this lasts. Yeah. Yes, that happens. You need to have a separate place for you want to, by the way, speaking of which, you want to have a good, respectful place to keep them. You don't want them under food. You don't want them in a place where they're going to be broken or moved around a lot. So keep them out of the way if you can. Okay. That's that. None of these 4 species should be withered or anything like that. It should be green. The aravot, the leaves look this shape, like a mouth, right? It should not be, by the way, it should not be serrated. A lot of willows have serrated leaves. So if they're a little bit serrated, you could barely tell, that's fine, but they should ideally be smooth. the kind that we buy that cost a lot of, that cost the money for the set, those are smooth leaves, not serrated. Serrat. Yeah, thank you. Okay. By the way, Aravot and Hadassim are not mentioned in the Torah. Neither are Etrogim. Right. So how do we know? It says pre-Eitz Hadar. It's supposed to take the tree of a beautiful fruit. Take the fruit of a beautiful tree. Take the fruit of a beautiful tree. Pre-Eitz Hadar. So the fruit of a beautiful tree. There's a lot of beautiful trees. So maybe we should take apples. Orange trees look nice to me. How do you know banana tree? How do you know you're taking? How do you know you're taking the etrog? It's because the hidur, the hadar, the beauty of the tree is that it smells like or is somehow like the fruit itself. An apple tree isn't at all related to the tree. I mean, an apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's true, but an apple doesn't taste anything like the tree. It doesn't smell anything like the tree. If you were to take the branch of an apple tree and smell it, you could do this if you if you're in Julian or whatever, you'll see it doesn't really smell like an apple. But an etrog tree smells citrusy, right? So the branches themselves. So that's an interesting reason why we use etrogim.
Also, wasn't there like a description one time, like in about Hoshanot using potatoes?
Yeah. Okay, but no question. By the way, the Mishnah says an etrog has to be an etrog. It's not pre-Eitz Hadar. You just use any fruit you want. It has to be that. And yes, you're talking about the incident that's mentioned in the Mishnah of when people when a Kohen was basically heretical and was not listening to the rabbis, and the people pelted him with etrogim. So yes.
And it was like, oh, why would they have random etrog to them on Sukkot time?
Hopefully we took them last Wednesday, then pray.
I don't know.
It
It was the last day. I believe it was. I hope it was the last day. Either way, you don't want to damage your etrog. You want to, yeah. So it was a whole issue, by the way. The Gemara gets into it, whether they were supposed to do that, whether they did the right thing by pelting him with that of all things.
Why do people throw tomatoes at people?
Yeah. Mark Twain mentions tomatoes and dead cats, so better just tomatoes, I think. That's Huckleberry Finn. All right, so all right, so smelling an etrog. Smelling an etrog is also perhaps an issue, just like smelling your smelling the hadassim, but not as much of an issue apparently. Maybe because it's not its primary feature isn't necessarily just its smell, because it's really primarily it's edible, so you can eat it. It's a fruit. All right. Should we get into Shemitah? We'll talk about Shemitah next year, right? Because this year's a Shemitah year, and etrogim are fruit, so it's an issue getting fruit from Israel in the Shemitah year. Well,
Etrogs are not from Israel?
they sometimes are. They do grow them there. Ours are not. Right. Ours, I believe, mostly from California, but also Italy, Turkey, the etrogim. People in Israel next year will probably be buying theirs from Italy and Turkey mostly, just to avoid any questions. Anyway, not going to get into all that. We'll save that for next year. All right, let's. So we talked about already the other. So those are the two of the right halachot of Sukkot. The other one is simcha. Simcha. What's simcha? So the Gemara talks about simcha in terms of drinking wine and eating meat. So if you like wine, you should drink wine every day of Sukkot, including Chol HaMoed. You have to drink some wine every day of Sukkot and Chol HaMoed if you like wine, and if it's illegal for you, etc., etc. Doctor, whatever, it's not unhealthy, and etc. So then obviously you drink wine. If you like to eat meat, should eat meat every day of Sukkot and Chol HaMoed. If you don't like meat, or for whatever health reason, you can only eat chicken, you should eat chicken. If not that, then fish. Or if not any of those three, then a food that you like. You like lasagna, you should have lasagna. Or, I don't know about every single day, but you should eat food you like every day. That you should food and enjoying yourself is part of the Simchat Yom Tov, and that includes Chol HaMoed. Being dressed properly, in other words, being dressed in holiday clothing, is a mitzvah for all the days of Sukkot and Chol HaMoed. I see very often people on Chol HaMoed trips, they'll wear on the Yom Tov they'll wear, I don't know, a suit or whatever it is that they wear, and then Chol HaMoed they'll wear a polo shirt. I have no problem with polo shirts. Don't get me wrong, Marco Polo, but I know I played the game. But there's nothing wrong with polo shirts. The problem is if you don't wear that on Yom Tov because it's not Yom Tovi for you, Chol HaMoed should also be as Yom Tovi for you. You don't want to get your nice shirt dirty, whatever. Okay, so don't do something that's going to get it dirty. You have to do some sort of work. You work somewhere where you're like work in a kitchen or you're a painter or whatever, and you have to do your work on Chol HaMoed. There is a halacha. You are allowed to work if you can't avoid it. You're allowed to work. So you are allowed to wear, in that situation, you're allowed to wear your uniform, right? You're going to get, otherwise you're going to get your suit dirty, etc. That's not ideal. Any questions about that? Meat, wine, and fancy clothing are some of the halachot of Chol HaMoed and Yom Tov. Okay. Also in Chol HaMoed, there are certain malachot you're not supposed to do. And this people make this mistake all the time. I don't know why. There's, as far as I know, there's no real leniency for any of this. You're not supposed to write on Chol HaMoed unless you have to for work. And then if you can, you should write in some sort of indirect way. So yes, typing is better. Typing on a computer is better than writing by hand. Which is interesting because it's not the usual way of writing anymore. Because the usual way now is with the computer. So it's interesting, but you're not doing it directly with your hand, and you're not typing it. You're not printing it necessarily. You can't. By the way, you are allowed to also print. You have to push print on your computer. That's not considered writing. For Chol HaMoed purposes, not Yom Tov. Yom Tov not allowed. Okay, no laptop for Yom Tov. Sorry. Okay, so for Chol HaMoed, you should not write, and if you have to, write somebody's phone number down, write a shopping list, a recipe, then you should use your opposite hand or some other unusual way of writing, if you can.
Maybe using our phones a lot.
It's the same as a laptop.
No, I know, but like if we're really not necessarily.
In general, you shouldn't use your phone a lot. That's not a halakha already. It leads into other halakhot. But yes, yeah.
You randomly think of something you want to search on Google, and you're like,
How many raisins does Raisin Bran have?
Until after the fog to write that, because it's kind of unnecessary. Like I don't even think about it.
There's no problem typing it on your phone.
For any type.
Yeah, it's not just Yom Tov.
Laptop type of thing?
Yes, no problem. It's not considered writing. Okay. The other often ignored halacha of Chol HaMoed is you're not supposed to do laundry. This gets very difficult for people. It's a lot of days of no laundry. So you have to do your laundry before Yom Tov, before Sukkot. Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to do laundry unless under one exception, and that is babies. If you have babies who dirty if you have babies who dirty themselves, then certainly you're allowed to do laundry for them. By the way, I've asked this question before. I've gotten different answers, honestly, but I've asked this question before, and the majority answer is no. And the question is, if I'm already doing laundry for the baby, can I throw in some of my own shirts and whatever? And the answer is no. Uh, no, you should not. Again, this takes some preparation, some planning. So the next couple of days, make sure you have all your clothes laid out. You know what you're wearing, et cetera, et cetera. Try not to get too dirty in these clothes. Have a spare just in case. Whatever. But laundry is a problem for a Chol HaMoed. There is, I think, another exception which is not relevant to almost anybody unless you're watching this online, and that is the exception is if you're being let out of prison. Okay, so if you're being let out of prison and you don't have any clean clothes, you might be allowed to do laundry, but hopefully nobody's in that situation. Nobody's in the situation of being in prison. If you're being let out, that's different stuff. If you deserve to be out. Not going to get into all that now. Also, the haircuts. Also, you shouldn't do haircuts or shaving. That's nails. Shouldn't cut nails on Chol HaMoed as well. That's all connected. You shouldn't disconnect them. All right. So thank you. All right. So those are the three halachot that are mentioned in the Torah. And then the two that are mentioned by the rabbis, we already talked about Simchat Beit HaShoeva, which is the Nisuch HaMayim ceremony, which is they basically had a sacrifice of water. They poured water on the altar.
We went into the tunnel and
You saw that?
yeah, we went into the tunnel where they would grab the water from.
It is pretty cool. Yeah, there's a special place where they got the water from. There's a whole ceremony we don't have time to go into right now. If you want to look it up, and the Mishnah describes it in quite beautiful detail. The Gemara goes into it in more depth. The fourth chapter, I think it's the fourth chapter, fifth chapter, fifth chapter of the Masechta Sukkah talks about the Nisuch HaMayim ceremony. What was the fifth halacha we were going to talk about?
Hoshanot?
The Hoshanos, yeah. I don't have time to. We don't have time. All right, you take the lulav and etrog and the other two species, and you walk around the bima while you're praying. By the way, a halacha of Hoshanos that almost nobody seems to know is that you're supposed to hold the lulav and etrog the way you do when you shake the lulav and etrog. In other words, the lulav in your weaker hand, the etrog in your weaker hand, the lulav hadasim and aravot in your stronger hand, depending on if you're left-handed or right-handed. If you're right-handed, then if you're ambidextrous, pretend you're right-handed for this, and you hold the lulav hadasim and aravot in your right hand, and the lulav attached to it, and then you're supposed to walk around with the and say the proper prayers of the hakafot of the Hoshanot. Now, obviously, this is going to get difficult because you don't have these prayers memorized. So how do you do that? So actually, what you're supposed to do is kind of balance the sitter in your arms while you're holding the four species in your hands, and so that you can. You're not supposed to have. What most people do is they have the four species in one hand and the sitter in the other hand, and machzor, and they're walking around like this. They're actually not performing the mitzvah correctly. I said it. There. As controversial as that might be, a great number of people are not doing the mitzvah correctly. So yes. There are people have their on the wrist, like there's a bracelet that has the Hoshanas written out on the bracelet, and you can read it from the bracelet while you're walking around. A lot of people do that. You can also print it out online. You can look for it online, print it out, staple it. That's what I do every year, or try to do if I remember.
You put it on your wrist.
Yeah, you put it on your wrist, you staple it, and you put it on your wrist, and then so you've got it. That's the ideal way to do that mitzvah, if you can. What other important halachot are there? How to shake the lulav. We don't have time for that, but so you shake it in basically forward to the right. You Ashkenazim pivot a little bit to the right. Like in Friends, you pivot. All right, and then you shake it a little bit to the back. You turn, you shake it to the back to the left, and then to up, right, and then downwards, but not pointing down, but you like sort of squat down a little bit and go down, and then that's it.
Third with forward, right?
Yeah.
Forward, right, left, back.
Yeah,
Up,
yeah. You start with forward, correct. Up and down. So, and that's also, by the way, in case you're ever curious, that is how you did all of the shaking of anything that you'd ever have to shake in the Beit Hamikdash. So, like if you brought, for example, your bikurim, you took it to the Kohen, and you with the basket, you would also have to go up and down. Yeah, sometimes, and that's how. You want to hear an interesting midrash that you probably learned before, but not maybe haven't imagined. But when the Levium were first made Levium by Moshe Rabbeinu, he shook them exactly the same way. If you did them all at once or not is an interesting question, but we're not going to get into that. But it also, up, forward, to the side, up and down. So it was quite a shaky experience. It shook them up. So that's the basic laws of Sukkot. There's a lot, as you can see just from the questions. There's a lot to go into. Each one of these 5 halachot could have taken several classes probably to get into all the details. There's a whole tractate on this. So I hope I gave a basic idea of how to do things. If you have any individual questions, you can contact me in any of the usual ways. Oh my gosh, I just realized I didn't record this. All right. Anyway, it's on Facebook though. It's on Facebook. I'll try to download it and upload it to YouTube. And thank you for listening.